Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really significant area,
Yeah, really important.
the impact of racism on mental and emotional well-being. We're going to be digging into concepts like racial trauma and racial battle fatigue.
And we've got some great sources for this. Info from Minnesota State University, Mankato, insights from Mary Frances Winter's book, Black Fatigue.
Right, and also a research study looking at contemporary racism and mental health among middle-class Black Americans.
Exactly. So our goal here, really, is to get to the heart of the psychological, the emotional toll that racism takes.
Yeah.
We want to understand how these experiences actually, show up for people. What are the signs?
And, crucially, how these burdens can maybe be addressed, giving you a clearer picture of it all.
That's the plan.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Our sources give us some key definitions to start with. Racial trauma, sometimes called race-based stress.
Mm-hmm.
It's described as the physical and psychological symptoms that BIPOC individuals can experience after facing distressing, maybe even life-threatening racist events.
And these events, they can come from people holding white supremacist views, sure, but also from policies, from systems. It's broad.
That's a really key point. It's not always about, like, a direct personal attack, is it?
No, not at all. The trauma can be triggered just by perceiving racist events or witnessing them happen to someone else.
Or even just understanding the ongoing weight of systemic racism in society.
Right. And the Minnesota State info also flags that these effects can be intergenerational.
Wow, yeah, passing down through families and communities.
And then you've got racial battle fatigue, or RBF.
RBF, right.
Like-
So this is described more as the buildup.
Exactly. The cumulative psychological, social, physiological, emotional weight from those repeated microaggressions, macroaggressions, and just overt racist abuse.
And it particularly affects Black individuals, according to the sources.
Yes. I mean, think about it as this constant drain on your energy. You're always dealing with hostile, demeaning, dismissive, frankly harmful race-based stressors.
So it's not just single incidents.
No, it's the sheer persistence of it, the ongoing nature that just wears people down. Mentally, emotionally, even physically.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Oh.
The Minnesota State University document, it really breaks down some common signs and symptoms for both racial trauma and RBF.
And it's quite a list.
It really is. Things like trouble with schoolwork, increased anger or anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
even apathy, like just not caring anymore,
Yeah.
or becoming really defensive.
Yeah, and a whole range of emotional responses, too, like depression, feeling detached, maybe emotional numbness, or, trying hard to suppress feelings.
Escapism comes up too.
Mm-hmm. And physically, just sheer exhaustion, frustration, feeling helpless or hopeless.
And that hypervigilance, that constant feeling of being on guard.
Absolutely. That heightened state of alert, it's exhausting in itself.
It really shows how deep this goes, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
The list continues with things like internalizing negative stereotypes about your own race.
Which is incredibly damaging.
Yeah. Feeling irritable all the time, low motivation, muscle tension, actively avoiding certain places or situations.
Emotional withdrawal, too, or maybe resistance. Sadness, shock after certain events, sleep problems, becoming isolated.
And even, it notes, potentially verbal, nonverbal, or physical combativeness or defensiveness in some cases.
When you look at that whole list, what really hits home is just how many different parts of a person's life are affected.
Totally. It makes it so clear that racism isn't just some abstract social issue. It has very real, very significant consequences for mental health, physical health, just overall well-being.
It's not just, feeling bad for a day. It's tangible impacts on how people function, how they navigate their lives.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and look at Mary Frances Winter's book, Black Fatigue. This really gets into personal stories, especially in the workplace context.
And the experiences she documents are, well, they're powerful. Black employees across different fields reporting feeling undervalued, disrespected.
Like outsiders.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're always on the periphery.
And she gives specific examples, right?
Oh, yeah. Lack of Black representation in leadership. Being passed over for promotions, often with flimsy excuses.
That feeling of being invisible, even when you're contributing.
Right. And the constant need to be on, to manage how you present yourself, maybe more carefully than others.
And then getting labeled too sensitive if you actually call out inappropriate behavior.
Ugh, yes. That double standard. It's incredibly frustrating.
That constant pressure to be perfectly professional, never slip up.
Mm.
It must be so draining over time.
Absolutely. And this feeling of not really belonging, even when companies are talking all about inclusive culture.
There's a gap there between the words and the reality for many Black employees.
A big gap. And Winters points out how hard it used to be, maybe still is in some places, to even talk about race at work. That silence just lets these things continue.
Winters argues pretty strongly that these repeated experiences are actually trauma-inducing.
Yes, and that they directly affect job performance and well-being. She also connects the dots between racism, including workplace racism, and those wider health disparities we see affecting Black and brown communities.
And she talks about this idea of sublime ignorance among white people. What's that about?
It's this idea that sometimes there's a lack of awareness, maybe even a willful ignorance about these injustices. It might come from not having real conversations about race.
Or, as she notes, dismissing or ignoring findings from audits that show racial inequities in an organization.
Exactly. It's like if you don't acknowledge the problem, maybe you don't feel responsible for fixing it.
Which raises huge questions about accountability, right? If leadership isn't aware or chooses not to see it.
How can things change? Her point about ignoring audit results is really telling. You can have the data, but if no one acts on it,
It just stays data.
okay.
Let's bring in the third source now, the research article from PubMed Central. This one looks specifically at contemporary racism's impact on the mental health of middle-class Black Americans.
And importantly, this study focused only on college-educated Black Americans.
Right. And what did they find?
Well, the findings were pretty stark. A clear, significant link between experiencing unfair treatment and poorer mental health, specifically more depressive symptoms.
And that was true for both the everyday stuff, the microaggressions, and the bigger major discrimination events.
Yes, both. And what's really interesting, or perhaps troubling, is that socioeconomic status, education level, income, assets, owning a home, it didn't wipe out that connection.
So achieving middle-class status doesn't necessarily protect Black individuals from the mental health toll of racism.
It doesn't seem to fully know. This backs up something called the diminishing returns hypothesis.
Diminishing return.
Yeah, the idea is basically that as Black Americans gain more socioeconomic status, they might actually end up encountering more racism, maybe because they're in predominantly white spaces more often.
I see. Like increased visibility leading to more scrutiny or bias, perhaps.
Could be. And this increased exposure kind of cancels out some of the health benefits you'd normally expect from higher SES.
The study also mentioned heightened vigilance.
Yes, that constant anticipatory stress, expecting unfair treatment, always being on guard, that too was strongly linked with more depressive symptoms.
It's like carrying this extra weight all the time.
Exactly. The researchers really stress how insidious contemporary racism can be. It's not always overt hatred, but these subtle, everyday forms of unfairness, the microaggressions, the biases, they add up.
And have a measurable negative impact on mental health.
A substantial impact. And the big takeaway here is that just focusing on boosting socioeconomic status isn't enough for health equity. You have to address the racism itself.
Right.
Directly.
Okay, so given all this,
Mm-hmm.
the trauma, the fatigue, the mental health impacts,
Yeah.
what can be done? Our sources offer some coping mechanisms and recommendations.
Yeah, thankfully they do. The Minnesota State University materials suggest continuing social justice work, if that's important to you, but pairing it with calming practices.
Right? Like specific breathing techniques, 4-7-8 breathing, box breathing, ways to regulate your body's stress response.
Mm-hmm. And grounding techniques, too, like the 5-4-3-2-1 exercise.
Yeah.
That can be really helpful to pull you back into the present moment when things feel overwhelming.
And they really emphasize intentional self-care
Mm.
across the board, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual.
Absolutely critical. Things like yoga, mindfulness, journaling, getting movement, creative arts, finding what works for you.
They also suggest, spiritual practices, meditation, spending time in nature.
And taking breaks,
Yeah.
especially from social media and the constant news cycle, which can just feed the stress.
Definitely. Developing a positive racial and cultural identity is mentioned too, and strengthening your social support network.
And a really key reminder, you don't have to fight every single battle alone. It's okay to lean on support.
Learning more about racial trauma and RBF itself can be empowering, just having the language to name it.
For sure. And of course, seeking professional help, therapy, counseling. They mention resources like the Minnesota State Mankato Counseling Center, African American Affairs there, and also broader ones like therapy for Black girls and therapy for Black men.
So that's more on the individual coping side. What about organizations? Mary Frances Winters in Black Fatigue has recommendations there too, right?
Yes, definitely focused on what organizations can do. A fundamental first step, she points out, is just acknowledging the emotional toll. Recognizing that racism, whether it's subtle bias or overt acts, has a real impact.
And assessing readiness for conversations about race,
Yeah.
especially for white individuals.
Right. She suggests focusing on listening if you're not really ready to engage constructively yet. And when audits are done on the racial climate,
Leadership has to act on them, not just file them away.
exactly, real accountability based on the findings, and transparency, share the results with everyone.
That makes sense. Fosters shared understanding. She also recommends regular listening sessions for BIPOC employees.
Yes, with options for anonymous feedback so people feel safe sharing their real experiences.
And maybe the most crucial point, believe BIPOC employees when they share their experiences.
Yes. Resist that urge to rationalize, minimize, or dismiss. Just listen and believe their reality.
And finally, commit to ongoing listening, ongoing learning to build empathy. And importantly,
The onus for education shouldn't always fall on BIPRC colleagues. White individuals need to do their own work, their own learning about racial issues.
right, don't rely on others to constantly explain it all.
So if we wrap this all up, the key takeaways seem to be that racial trauma and racial battle fatigue are, well, they're significant psychological and emotional burdens. They come directly from racism.
And they show up in all sorts of ways, affecting BIPOC individuals disproportionately. And as we saw, even middle-class status doesn't grant immunity.
Addressing this takes effort on multiple fronts, doesn't it? Acknowledging the impact is huge.
Yeah, plus using those individual coping strategies to build resilience.
And pushing for real systemic changes in organizations and society to actually dismantle the structures that cause the harm in the first place.
It really leaves us with something to think about.
Definitely. So here's a question for you, the listener. Knowing about these documented mental health costs of navigating biased systems, how might a deeper understanding of racial fatigue and trauma change how we approach well-being and equity? Not just for individuals, but society-wide.
And maybe something smaller, more immediate. What's one small action you could take today? Maybe to learn a bit more, or perhaps to support someone you know who might be carrying the weight of racial battle fatigue.